Hello everybody, welcome to Attend Purulia. I am Torit Mato. This is the fifth video of the Painting with Acrylic series. Till now, we have seen in earlier videos the basics of acrylic materials, color concepts, concepts of creating volume and creating space using linear perspective. Today we'll see atmospheric or aerial perspective. We have earlier seen that in a small area or for a small object or in a small space, we can use highlights and shadows to show volume of the objects and also to some amount the space. In a bigger area or space with mostly the geometrical shapes, we can use linear perspective to show three dimensions and distances. Atmospheric perspective is about how things appear at a distance because of the effects of atmosphere. The objects at a distance look hazy and smoky because of the atmospheric elements such as pollution, smog, humidity, smoke, etc. The effect may not be all that apparent in photographs or even in real life scenarios, but to create that illusion of distance in painting, a little exaggeration in the change in color, value as well as saturation does the trick. Few rules that can be applied in case of atmospheric perspective are change in hue or color. The colors of the objects in the background are usually cooler and grayer or bluer. Let's say in case of mountains, the far away ones will look bluish despite them having green forest cover. And the really far ones will almost have the color of the sky at that distance and may diminish with the sky. Of course, the exception is during sunrise and sunset. Even the mountains will appear a bit reddish. At those times, we can feel the distance of the mountains despite warm color, since the background sky color is also warm, reddish or orangish. Change in value. Usually the value of the objects in the background will become lighter. Further the objects are, they will appear softer and lighter. Lightest in the background, darkest in the foreground, and the middle ground will have middle tones. Change in saturation of the colors. The colors of the objects become less saturated and more grey as the distance increases. Change in contrast. The objects in the foreground, the nearer objects, will have more tonal contrast and have more details than those in the background or even the middle ground. Linear perspective as well as atmospheric perspective in combination does the illusion of creating distance. Linear perspective is not just about geometric shapes. The properties of linear perspective, such as reducing size of features as the distance increases, also fall in this category. So once we observe carefully and place the perspective both linear as well as atmospheric correctly, we can create that magic. This implicates pale and bluer colors in the background and bright colors with more contrast and details in the foreground, along with the sizes of the objects reducing in size as the distance increases and may diminish at the horizon. I'll be using photographic reference to explain these effects. Most of these photos I took during my stay in Dehradun. On most of the Saturdays and Sundays, I used to trek in the hills of Mussoorie and I captured these photographs. You can see that the hills further away become progressively lighter and grayer. And even in the foreground, it's not even green or just bright green. There are shades of yellow and green, but they are mostly bright. The shades vary from the distant mountains to the nearby plants. The atmospheric perspective is all about varying the hue, value and saturation of the colors to show depth. To explain all these effects, I'll paint this photograph. I'll edit it slightly in size to make it suitable for my painting surface. I'll be painting on a canvas of 12 inches by 18 inches. So I'll crop it a little bit. And to start with, I'll apply an orangish colored background to create richness in my colors. Then I'll lay out my palette. I generally lay out colors from light to dark and warm to cool. But in case of acrylics, I take out only limited range and quantity, which I can finish in one sitting. Even in one sitting, I may take out paints more than once. It helps me reduce paint wastage. This suits me, but many artists like to take out all the paints on their palette at one go, because if they have to take out paints in between, they feel distracted. The first step, like any other painting, is to sketch out the major shapes. I'll use a dark color to mark out the outlines. If you make outline with pencil, it may not be very apparent. So you can take help of a dark color since the background is light. But if you are painting on a dark background, like say black canvas or something, you can use a light color. It's always preferable to start off blocking from the farthest. That way we'll achieve overlapping as we come closer. You may remember overlapping is one of the tricks we can apply to show distance. The sky in the background is almost white except for a patch of grey clouds on the left corner on top. First let me block the sky, then the furthest mountain, a pale bluish grey shade. The next range is also bluish grey but a bit less pale and a bit greener. As we move closer, the hills will be greener and less bluer and brighter. The frontmost will be darker and brighter. Once we apply all these layers, that is the first layer, we'll allow this to dry before applying the next layer. In the second layer of paint application, we'll define the shapes and match the values and saturation even better. We also need to vary the shades a bit to show shadows and highlights within a range to bring out the volume of the mountains, else they will look absolutely flat. The mountains aren't flat. There are a lot of vegetation, there might be big rocks, there might be huge trees and so on. So if you observe carefully, we'll notice some dark patches in the bottom showing shadows, also some lighter patches showing the highlights where the light falls directly. We need to be careful in matching these shadows and highlights. Too much of contrast will make them look out of the place. We must establish the direction of the light at the first place, and all the highlights and shadows in the entire painting should follow the same pattern. In case of more straight lines and flat coverage, flat brushes are better, and in case of organic shapes, round brushes are better. But somehow I feel more comfortable with flat ones in any situation, maybe because of their firmness. I just hold them accordingly. It's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable. We'll further define the objects, especially the ones in the foreground. Make the details with more contrast. The objects in the foreground will have more details than those in the background. To push the objects in the background even further, we can also use a technique called glazing, where we can apply a thin down layer of white to create a bit of haze. We can use a medium or a specially made glazing medium, or simply water to thin down the paint. Just add a little bit of paint in lot of medium or lot of water and apply over the entire area of the background as a wash. It has to be really transparent. It will reduce the brightness of the entire area, but don't apply too much or else it will cover the entire earlier layer. So be careful in doing so. Once we finish the entire painting, we can add some more details in the foreground with varying bright greens and yellows, define some branches and grasses. We can also see the small changes in values within the areas of highlights and shadows in various layers. So you can see in one sitting itself we could make a decent painting. We can further add details and work on the painting or even make it better and make it more realistic. You can also choose any landscape and try out a painting based on this theme. That's all for the time being, friends. In the next video, we'll see basic concepts of composition and how to compose and paint a still life. You will realize the composition makes a big impact in any painting. A dull painting may look interesting, and a very interesting painting, because of poor composition, may appear very boring. Stay healthy and safe. See you.